This is the Run Pod Option. I'm Marty.
I'm Kyle.
And I'm Jeff.
And you can follow us on Twitter at RunPodOption or email us runpodoption@gmail.com. We are partnered with the Forgotten Five, forgotten5.com. And today is our Big Ten preview. Please check out some of the conference previews we've done before. We've got the Big Ten, the ACC, and the SEC left. And I wanted to bring in someone I trust with Big Ten coverage. Not that I don't trust Jeff. We all know he's a Michigan man, but
I don't trust Jeff.
But we need, any help we can get, we'll get.
Good.
So I called in Mark Givler. Mark,
how we doing?
We're doing fantastic. Mark, why don't you tell the audience a little about yourself and what you're involved with?
Yeah, so I spent, maybe 10, 11 years with the Rivals.com network. Launched a site about 2 months ago, BuckeyeScoop.com. We, a bunch of us in the Ohio State market, kind of got together and joined forces. We have a great staff. I'm super excited about the guys I was able to acquire, and it's myself and Bill Green and Alex Gleitman. Those are all big names in the Ohio State recruiting market. We've got a young guy named Mick Walker who is another up-and-coming recruiting guy that we're very excited about. And then we got Tony Gerdeman and Tom Orr with team coverage, and Ross Fulton breaking down X's and O's, and Kirk Barton, former Ohio State captain, kind of doing a little bit of everything for us. So it's been a great first couple months. The response has been amazing, and I'm just thrilled with everything with the site right now, and happy to be here and shooting the breeze with you guys.
And that's BuckeyeScoop.com. We're going to have a link in the show notes for anybody that's listening and doesn't have a chance to write it down. So when we started these conference previews, we were doing so under the assumption that the season was going to happen. And part of that was to stay positive. And when we booked Mark for the show last week, that still kind of stood. And then it happened. We're recording this July 13th, and the Big Ten Conference was the first to announce that they are going to a conference-only schedule. So there was a lot of talk we were doing about a lot of really cool out-of-conference games we were excited for, and that's kind of negated, which is a bummer. So I want to start with kind of a quick hit here. First, Jeff and Kyle, what's your gut feeling when you saw that news?
Not surprised, honestly. It's all kind of going that way, and I don't want to get all sad and depressing, but I would be very shocked if it doesn't change again. Like as we get closer to the season, I was a little surprised that it happened so quickly.
As in this early in July?
Yeah. I thought that might have been a decision that gets made later in July, even into early August, just to see like what everything looks like getting closer. But kudos to them for getting out in front of it and kind of setting the tone. As we've seen, the Pac-12 has followed suit, and I'm not surprised. I won't be surprised if the SEC and ACC and Big 12 do the same.
So Jeff, you have fandom in the Big Ten. So what was your reaction?
I was bummed out. To start, there's a ton of really good out of conference matchups we were all looking forward to. Michigan, Washington, Ohio State, Oregon, Wisconsin, App State. What?
Yeah.
But I wasn't surprised. I wasn't surprised that they canceled it. I'm with Kyle. I was a little surprised how early the decision was made, and also the fact that they didn't pursue local opponents. There was kind of some talk across a couple teams' boards that, hey, maybe we're just going to cancel our long trips and bring teams in that we can bring in on a bus. I was really hoping that would happen so we could at least get more games, but I understand why they did it.
You were just looking for those directional Michigan games that you can watch.
Western got free. I was ready.
Hey,
Youngstown State's all 12 of their games are against the Big Ten. They beat Northwestern. So, Mark, with you especially, this is kind of a two-sided question. First, your initial response, especially running a website that specializes in one of the Big Ten teams. So from that standpoint, and then also maybe why you think the Big Ten in general was maybe the first to pull that trigger.
Yeah, I mean, my initial response was that this was probably going to happen. It just felt like we were working toward that, and that the first move to make, if you're going to alter the season, wouldn't simply be to just cancel the season. You would, if you're actually trying to play football this fall, you would want to get a situation where you can control everything, and that's what they did. Now you if you're only playing conference games, you can control the testing, you can control the environment, and there is a financial component there. I don't know how much you want me to dive into that, but there is a cost cutting. There are cost cutting measures here in terms of not having to, for Ohio State's purposes, not having to go out to Oregon. You cut out the reason some of these MAC games are dropped is now the assumption is that either they're not going to have to pay these schools at all, or they're going to greatly reduce what they pay out because they're not going to be getting the gate revenue. Even if we have football this fall, it's going to be more than half empty stadiums. I would venture to guess at this point, if we have football this fall, it's going to be empty stadiums. But so there's a lot of cost cutting there as well. So this was kind of the natural move to cut some costs and to gain control of the landscape as best you can. And that was kind of my takeaway. And I just think that's really the methodology here. And, the Big Ten's kind of been ahead of the curve. I don't know if you want to put it that way. They've been early to react, put it that way. Maybe that's a better way to put it. They've been early to react in a lot of these situations. I think Ohio State and Michigan were two of the first schools to cancel spring football. So it's just kind of been their MO through all of this. So I wasn't surprised to see them be kind of leading the pack a little bit.
We're going to get into the preview, and similarly to what we did before, we're still going to speak as if there's still going to be a full conference season, right? Because we know at least that is possible at this point of our recording. So like our other shows, we're going to go through new staff highlights, maybe staff discussion, player spotlights, and any maybe side of the ball that we're excited to see how they progress, maybe how they're not going to progress, maybe they take a step back, and then we'll get into some of the key games, which now are all conference games, and then we'll make a prediction because we're going to assume, since there's no scheduling information released from the Big Ten yet, that they're just going to be playing the conference games as they were scheduled to this year. Does that sound good to everybody?
Sounds
yes.
Good.
Perfect. So let's start with the great Greg Schiano.
Oh, is he great?
So Greg Schiano returns to Rutgers. He was there for 11 years. He amassed a 68-67 record. He was 5-1 in bowl games. We all remember how great they were in the Big East.
They were great for a little bit. Okay, that's not.
Yeah. Well, that's a. I'm trying to hype up Rutgers fans that are definitely listening.
Okay.
We hope. If you're a Rutgers fan, at us. He brings in Rob Smith.
Joke's on you. There are no Rutgers fans.
God, you made that bold claim before. Rob Smith comes with them. He coached with them at Rutgers prior. He coached with the Tampa Bay Bucks. But the hire I'm really excited by is he brought in Sean Gleason. So correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but Greg Schiano was at Ohio State before all this, correct?
Correct.
So from your perspective, which is there's a lot of recruiting parts of it, what do you think Schiano can do for Rutgers in the recruiting department and as a key to his success, I guess?
Well, I know Schiano's got a very there's a broad spectrum of opinions on Greg Schiano, but here's why I think this made sense for everybody. You have to be an insider. You have to be, I'm going to make a mafia reference.
It's perfect.
It's Jersey.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's where look, it's Jersey. So you're either one of the guys or you're not. You're either a made guy or you're not. And unfortunately for Chris Ash, he was always kind of looked at as an outsider, and it just didn't mesh well. Walking the hallways of the high schools in North Jersey and just dealing with alumni and everything else. It wasn't a great fit. And that's one school where it just has to be a great fit. And they love Greg Schiano at those high schools in North Jersey. He's one of the guys. He's an insider. He's part of the mafia. He's part of the team there. And so from a recruiting standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. I think he's going to do pretty well there. Again, this is all relative. I think he's going to do pretty well there in terms of, getting some splash recruits. I think it's such a tough job. And I think there's only so many guys that can actually have success there. And I think he's one of the few that can. I mean, he's really the only guy who's shown he can do it. So from that sense, I think it's a good fit.
Here's my thing with that, though, is that he had a success when they were in the Big East, which is not the Big Ten. I mean, even at that time, I know that South Florida was good. I know that West Virginia was always kind of there, but that's not the same as having to deal with your Michigans, your Ohio States, your Penn States on a yearly basis. It's in trying to recruit against that. I don't know how well this is going to work.
Yeah, recruiting's only gotten to sort of a richer gets richer, right? So Rutgers, I think, to Mark's point, I think it's a good hire from the recruiting perspective because he can recruit that region really well. But the powers that be in college football, there's a lot of consolidated power in recruiting, it feels like, through a lot fewer schools than there were back when Schiano was a head coach last time.
And not to mention the competition in the conference is just better. And I feel like he's still going to be able to get the same kind of guys that he got at Rutgers beforehand. Ray Rice was a really good player. Mohamed Sanu was good. These guys were really good, but they were Big East good. I don't know if they're going to be Big Ten good.
Was Mike Teal then, I think?
Mike Teal was definitely their quarterback.
Okay.
Well, again, though, it's all relative. If you're going to tell me that you can't win at Rutgers in the current environment in the Big Ten East, I'll buy that. But I think Schiano will maximize whatever their ceiling is as a program in that environment.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Do I think he's going to win 9 or 10 games a year there? No, I don't. I think the Big Ten East is at worst the second best division in college football. So I think, maybe some expectations need to be adjusted there. I mean, I think, God, Rutgers fans are going to hate me for saying this, but if you can go 6-6 there and go to a bowl game, that's a good season. I mean, and I know that's not going to go well with fans, but like that's in that division, that's what the expectations need to be, is try and get to a bowl game.
Maybe every once in a while you can flash and get like 8-9 wins, maybe.
I was going to say the Indiana season last year is probably the peak for Rutgers as it stands now, I think. And I do think that Schiano probably is the most likely person to get them there. At least we've seen how that program's been since he left. Just a shell.
Yeah, I mean, before Schiano, pre-Schiano, post-Schiano, disaster. I mean, so
awful.
I mean, he's the only guy who's proven that he can have any type of success there. And again, I get it. I mean, it's a different monster now than when they were in the Big East. But I mean, who's a better fit? Who do we know that would be a better fit? We have 50, 60, 70 years of history that says you really can't win there except for this guy. So I would give him the benefit of the doubt. I thought that was the hire that I thought Rutgers had to hire him, and I thought he had to take it because he had to rehabilitate himself a little bit in the industry after, which, I mean, I thought he got railroaded on the whole Tennessee thing, but at the end of the day, that was not a good deal for him. That was not a good situation for him. And he was kind of like hot lava there a little bit to others' programs where it was like, well, is he going to get another major job? And so he needed this job, I think, as much as they needed him to take it.
And I think the only other person in that region that I would have considered is the OC that he brought in, Sean Gleason, who's worked at Princeton. He's also from the region, and he's a really young, bright mind offensively. So that's what really makes the hire interesting. because I think we all remember how those Rutgers teams looked before, and I don't think that style in their standing in the Big Ten would actually get them to those 8 wins. It needs to be something like what Gleason does, which was break records on offense at Princeton, which was to coach Oklahoma State, and they had a fantastic, I think, a top 6 or 7 offense. Rutgers may never be a top 7 offense, but they need to be a top 20 or 30 offense, the year that they do reel off 6, 7, 8 wins, I think, for them to really compete.
Yeah, he's got a great staff, too. I mean, he put together great. Fran Brown's a really good recruiter. Nunzio Campanelli is a Jersey guy with great ties to high school there.
Yeah,
I forgot about Nunzio. God.
I mean, and I got to shout out my guy Ross Douglas, because I covered him at Avon High School in Ohio when he was coming out, and made him a 4-star prospect. So Ross Douglas is kind of on their defensive staff now. So he's helping the secondary. So I got to shout him out, Michigan guy. So get that in there real quick.
So there was another head coach that got brought into the Big Ten this year, and it was when D'Antonio stepped down, and they ripped Mel Tucker from Colorado's hands in February, I believe it was. It was just kind of out of nowhere. We finally did a show that talked about all the hirings, how we thought they did, and then, of course, Michigan State does their thing. Jeff, are you hoping that Michigan State is never good again?
No, I mean, it's more fun when they're competitive. This year they were bad, and they've been kind of trending the wrong direction for the last few years under D'Antonio, so I want them to be better, and I think he will get them back to a much more respectable level. I don't know if they'll ever reach the levels they got to under D'Antonio when they were winning Big Ten titles and going to the playoff. I just think it's too challenging of an environment, but they can be an 8 or 9 win team every year. I don't think that's unreasonable. They're a decent program.
How did we feel about Jay Johnson as the offensive coordinator?
Colorado fans didn't seem ecstatic about him, but then all the coaching insiders like Bruce Feldman say he's a rising star. So I don't know where the disconnect is.
So I tried to do as much homework on Jay Johnson as I could, and really the only difference I think that Michigan State is going to have in terms of how they looked is they're going to be a little bit less of a power running team, and Jay Johnson typically leans towards more zone type running, which I think is good. That bodes well for Michigan State, especially when they finished 96th or worse in offense the last 4 years, which is pitiful. So I don't think you have to even be particularly that good, just competent. And I think Jay Johnson is that. It's also tough because I do love the Scotty Hazelton hire. He's such a good defensive coordinator and also a really great mind. Mark, do you think that Mel Tucker will make a good difference there? And if you want to dive into the coordinators, something you like or don't like, whatever it is, feel free.
Yeah, so I think this is another hire that actually makes a lot of sense, and it's going to go back to recruiting a little bit. So Mel Tucker is a big-time Ohio guy, and Mark D'Antonio built that program recruiting the state of Ohio, and a lot of their downfall has been that the last few years, going back 4, maybe 5 years now, Kentucky has beat the crap out of them in the state of Ohio. Kentucky has become the new Michigan State in the state of Ohio, where they're getting all those second-tier kids that don't go to Ohio State and Michigan, and they're developing them, and they're winning 8, 9 games. And that is what has happened to Michigan State. And it got a little stale there. Mel is incredibly close with a lot of football coaches in the state of Ohio, high school coaches. If Glenville ever gets rolling again, Mel's Mr. Glenville. So there's a lot to like there on the recruiting upside. He gets Harlan Barnett back, who's Mr. Cincinnati, as his cornerbacks coach. I think that's a huge hire for them. And that's really the thing. They started getting whipped in Ohio by Kentucky, and they can't let Kentucky run them out of the state anymore. And so I think you got Mel, you got Barnett, you got Mike Tressel. I think they're prepared to kind of reclaim some of that territory a little bit. That's certainly going to be their goal. And so I like it from that standpoint. I'm a little uneducated, I guess, on the coordinators. Obviously, that's going to be important. I mean, you can't, you got to be able to do more than just recruit. You can't just be, out there getting 4-star kids and with no plan or no structure in place. But I think it started with talent. I think the decline started with talent, and I think they can fix that component. And then it's a matter of, can these other guys coach them up? But I do like the fit, because I think, again, if you're in the Big Ten and you don't recruit the state of Ohio, I think you're in trouble. It's by far the best state in the region for high school football talent. And if you're not having success there, I think it's hard to win the conference. And, we talked about expectations with Rutgers. Well, I think expectations probably have to change a little bit at Michigan State as well, where, a lot of that early success, weren't they over in the West? I mean, weren't they when they were legends and leaders? They were over. They were over on the other side, right? Whatever it was, that experiment, that disaster. But so now you're in the big boy division of the Big Ten. So is 10-2 a realistic expectation anymore? I don't know that is, but you can win 8 or 9 games there, like you guys said previously.
Maybe with this weird COVID time, we should go back to legends and leaders.
That's how they're going to make the Big Ten schedule this year. It's actually,
they probably will.
It's a round robin between leaders and legends.
I'm so fascinated to see the rumor of going to maybe 10 games. I'm so fascinated to see how they put that together, how they give every team a 10th conference game now, and to see that process. I just want to see that at this point, how they pick which, who they screw over and who gets a gift game or whatever. That's going to be funny.
They just let Maryland and Rutgers sit this one out, but they still get the TV market so that everybody else can play.
That was the whole point. That was the whole point of that. We could, that was not. Oh, they're not good football programs. Well, that doesn't really matter. They wanted the DMV and NYC, cable money. That's all they wanted.
So I have just a few more points here, and I'm going to throw a question to you, Jeff, towards the end of this. One of them. So two hires that are interesting to me, 2 offensive coordinator hires. Penn State steals Minnesota's offensive coordinator. So now Kirk Ciarrocca is there. And Minnesota's offense looked great last year at Tanner Morgan. We'll get into that as we get into players. And then I'm going to mess this name up, but Mike Bajakian is at Northwestern. He was at Boston College last year, and it's probably just a blind spot for me, but I had no idea who this guy was, right? The name didn't resonate, so I looked up some stuff. He was a Butch Jones disciple. He just followed him around. He was there with him at Central Michigan, at Cincinnati, at Tennessee, and then he worked for the Bucs in the NFL for a little bit. Northwestern, since 2013, hasn't finished at or above the national average in SP plus offensively. Every year, I'm going to call him Mike B, that Mike B was an offensive coordinator from Central Michigan, Cincy, Tennessee, and Boston College. They've never finished below the national average in SP plus. So are we ready for Northwestern to have not the worst offense in the Big Ten?
No.
Because it's neat.
But
I feel like I'm excited because, honestly, Northwestern has been an automatic turnoff for me on the TV because of how poor their offense has been for years now.
God, all I can think of, though, is if he was there with Butch Jones at Tennessee, is how underwhelming those teams were.
It's a national average, so they just had to be better.
Yeah,
and SP Plus is not exactly a pure statistical measure either, right? It's measuring efficiency and explosiveness. So you can still be bad, but throwing 80-yard touchdown passes. Not that Tennessee was doing that.
Yeah. I'd say it's probably Mike Bajakian.
I think it's. Oh God!
We're all going to have a different pronunciation.
I believe it's Bajakian, but it's Bajakian, tomato. I think I'm pretty sure it's Bajakian, but I did cover him for. I covered him for like a hot minute at Cincinnati for like a day or something. He wasn't there long.
Kirk Ciarrocca, I do think that's going to be a really fun hire because he did a lot of really easy, kind of keep it simple, stupid things on offense with Minnesota, and they were really good. And Penn State, they might not have the receiver talent totally that Minnesota had last year, but I think Penn State's going to just become more exciting on offense, which could be interesting this year. The question I had for you, Jeff, and Mark, please fill in on this if you have any insight, but I wanted to bring up what was happening at Iowa with Kirk Ferentz's son specifically, but the outpouring support for, I forget which Iowa player that came out and said it, but about dealing with different kind of microaggression and racist stuff in locker rooms. Do we think that this has, first, an impact on Iowa's season this year? And secondly, and this maybe go towards Mark a little bit, is there anything that you've seen on the recruiting side? I know it's been a short turnaround and COVID obviously interrupts some of this stuff, but from a recruiting standpoint, does it seem like this may be an opportunity where recruits are really going to cool on Iowa in general? Jeff, if you want to start.
Just my overall thoughts on the situation. I'm not surprised, and I'm sure Mark can speak to this. The coaching fraternity is a good old boys club, and I'm sure the strength community is like that too. So I'm a little surprised because Doyle, I think, was considered one of the best, strength coaches in the country. I think he's the highest paid, but I'm not surprised. This kind of stuff, if you talk to players over the years, I'm sure they would say, their strength coach treated them like dirt. But there's, on the flip side of it, there's no place for that kind of racism. Like, some of the stuff he said to the players, are you going to rob a drugstore? Stuff about do-rags, like that kind of crap. Just, if that's been going on for 20 plus years, then shame on Ferentz and shame on Iowa. That's all I have to say on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, I guess it's always a little surprising to me, especially this guy's reputation. And, like you said, he was the highest paid. I mean, this guy is one of the most highly thought of strength and conditioning coaches in the country. I'm never surprised to hear, I guess, some shocking language or stories like this, because it really is the strength and conditioning coach's team in the winter. The head coach turns the whole team over to the strength and conditioning coach, and it becomes almost basic training. Their job is to literally tear these guys down to nothing and then build them back up. I mean, that's they're trying to break these kids, and but you can't. There's lines you can't cross within that. You have to know how to do that in a way that doesn't cross a racial line or any.
And Mark, to be clear, you're speaking not about Iowa specifically, but just strength and conditioning programs in general.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there are a lot. I don't think you'd want to go to one of these winter workouts if you're sensitive or if you have, it's not for the faint of heart, what these coaches put these kids through in the winter. But again, you cannot alienate, 75% of your players. You cannot, you can't cross these racial lines or, any type of, protected class or anything like that. You have to keep it in the realm of, we're trying to make you better. We're trying to make you tougher. We're trying to make you faster. And, you can call kids soft and, you can push the envelope in certain directions. But, again, once you get into the racial stuff, I mean, you're barking up the wrong tree, and it's going to end badly. It's going to end badly like this, and there's no place for it. I mean, there's just no place for it. And so, yeah, if this has been going on for years, that's really unfortunate. I mean, that's just you just don't cross it. You don't cross that line.
My response is it goes into what you and Jeff both said. Like, it sucks to see, obviously. The only positive thing I have to pull out of it is that we're now in an environment where, and I think we spoke about this maybe last podcast or the one before that, but where players feel like they have the voice that they've always had, but they've been told they didn't, right? Because they are amateurs. So it is relieving, at least, to see no one ever wants there to be racism, but if it's invisible racism and no one sees it and it just ends up damaging kids or their trust in other people or whatever it is, that's 20 times worse than someone shining a light on it. So in that regard, I'm happy to see this kind of stuff get unearthed, because it means it's not in hiding anymore and we can address it. Like, I sincerely hope that if Doyle does keep his job and he's as good as he is, that he's learned a lesson too out of all this.
He is gone.
Yeah, he is gone. Well, it's not also that it's also that they have the voice. They also have the platform now to be able to put it out there with social media. Like prior to that, they'd have to find a media outlet. Now with this, they can actually get their story out.
Well, and I think Iowa players weren't allowed to have Twitter during the season. I might be wrong there, but I think some
that's
teams
been lifted.
Yeah, some teams had those social media restrictions for no distractions. But
looking at you, Pat Fitzgerald.
Yeah, I'm looking at you, Pat, with your cell phones. Thank you, Kyle, for the segue. We're going to go into player spotlights, maybe what to watch out for particular teams. Jeff and Mark, I want you to kind of jump in here. Kyle, you too, obviously, but I want to hold Michigan and Ohio State and maybe Penn State towards the end because they're kind of the power players. Wisconsin too, for any Wisconsin fans. But I want, because Jeff, I didn't even look up any Michigan stuff. I wanted you to do it, and Mark, same for Ohio State because you're the man there. So to start, I'll actually start with Northwestern since they brought up Pat Fitzgerald. Speaking of Bajakian, my player to watch, I have Peyton Ramsey, the transfer from Indiana that is going to be the quarterback, presumably, for Northwestern this year. He's going to have to battle off TJ Green, Hunter Johnson, but I think he's going to have to be the pivotal part if that offense is going to improve, and there's definitely room for it. They had 6 passing touchdowns all of last season.
Oof.
And Peyton Ramsey outscored their entire quarterback room. I'm excited to see what Ramsey does for Northwestern in what might even just be a one-year stopgap, but to take the next step offensively. Kyle?
I'm going to go with Rondell Moore. Just because, I mean, he is the Purdue offense. And if he stays healthy, he could easily be a dark horse for the Heisman. Kid's a freak. And
in his injury, I actually was going to mention David Bell because David Bell came up pretty big down the stretch for Purdue. And I think we forgot about it, Kyle. So I'm here to remind you that we are going to have the return of Jack the Snack Plumber.
Oh, Jack the Snack Plumber!
And he was pretty average last year, like truly, but his name is pure greatness despite not being related. There's a chance that he gets unseated by Aiden O'Connell or UCLA transfer quarterback Austin Burton. But David Bell and Rondell Moore are going to be an extremely fun 1-2 receiver tandem.
Well, you took my guy David Bell from me, but
oh no! If you have anything more on David Bell,
Wan'Dale Robinson in Nebraska. Okay. No, I don't know. I think he's a 3-and-done NFL guy. I mean, he's a big time guy. No, I'm looking forward to Wan'Dale Robinson. Caught 40 balls last year. He can carry it. He can catch it. He can hurt you in the return game. I think Nebraska is going to need a lot from him.
Jeff?
I'm going to keep it with Mark. Adrian Martinez, quarterback from Nebraska. Pressure's on. I mean, he showed promise as a freshman. Last year, he was just beat up, and they could not keep him upright. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Frost this year. Their schedule is backloaded. They start off with Northwestern, Illinois, and Rutgers, which is they could be 3-0, but after that, it's Ohio State, Penn State, Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota. So that could be a brutal finish if they can't turn things around. So I'm looking to see if Martinez can get some of his magic back from his freshman year.
What do you know? I have a Nebraska player too, and it is actually a defensive player. It's their cornerback, Cam Taylor-Britt. It interested me last year. He stood out in one of the games that I'd watched, and he lined up at linebacker, cornerback, and safety for them last year. So he really has a wild card aspect to him, and I think he could be on what is probably going to be a pretty mediocre defense, clearly far and above the best player on the field for them.
Big year for Scott Frost, by the way. Yep. Just throwing that out there. Really critical year for Scott Frost.
Well, let's take a small detour, Mark, because we asked this of our other guests. Do you think that because of how the season is laid out, if no other cancellations happen, it's only going to be a Big Ten year, the financial hit that all these institutions are going to have, do you think there's even a chance that they're going to release a coach just for... I mean, if their team totally gives up and like lights the stands on fire, like, yeah, okay. But like normal circumstances, just a poor year, do you think there's going to be a chance for coaches to be losing their jobs at the end of this year?
There is an element of job security that I think is getting added to this as we contemplate the financial ramifications here. Even and Nebraska's got money, and some of these big time these blue blood programs, they have money, but I don't know. I think it is going to take a bit of a dumpster fire, even more so than usual, to get a coach fired because of the buyouts. I just don't think this is a good landscape to be paying multiple head coaches. It's definitely not a good landscape to be paying a coach not to be your coach. I will say that. I will go out on that limb. So
I think that's correct. Absolutely. Jeff?
There was one other guy, and I know we're trying to hold off on the big boys.
No, we can do the big boys. I know that you and Mark are a lot more knowledgeable, so I had nothing to segue it into. That's all.
Well, it's actually a guy I didn't really get much of a chance to see last year. I know Mark probably saw him when he played against Ohio State, but Journey Brown is kind of being hyped as the next big Penn State running back. And they have a really talented backfield. They might have the best overall group of running backs in the Big Ten. So I heard Saquon comparisons being made the other day. I don't know if that's accurate. I think he's built a little differently, but he's a power runner, and I think he was a super talented guy coming out of high school. So excited to see him with his new OC and offensive line coach, opening things up for him.
Yeah, and I think Sean Clifford is a player to watch for me on that, for the same reasons. The offensive coordinator change, assuming there's going to be more run-pass option in their playbook. Journey Brown, Noah Cain, that whole stable of running backs is going to be really important on Clifford's development, because we saw last year he can't always take the heat. So I think Journey Brown's going to play a huge part in that for sure. I have another one, since we're talking about quarterbacks with great names, and it's since Peyton Ramsey left Indiana, we now have the return of Michael Penix Jr.
Ooh.
And he put on 15 pounds in the offseason, strong arm, quick legs. He's a playmaker, but health was an issue for him last year. So with Kalen DeBoer leaving, I'm kind of curious how Indiana looks offensively. They still have their top 2 rushers returning, their top 2 receivers returning. I was going to say 8 wins is probably another realistic expectation, but with the shortened schedule, I still think that they probably, assuming they play 10 games, that maybe 6 or 7 is still obtainable for them. And one of those running backs in particular, Stevie Scott, the third, I really liked watching him run last year.
We're leaving out, I'm surprised you're leaving these 2 out, Marty. The combo of Tanner Morgan and Rashad Bateman.
Well, we hadn't gotten to Minnesota yet. I was going to...
They're not a big boy.
No, I know.
That's PJ.
Yeah, PJ Fleck's got them on the up and up, man. They're going to be perennial West contenders now.
Okay, I still wasn't going to put them into the big boy category yet.
So Tanner Morgan, Rashad Bateman, they're really obvious picks. They're definitely players to watch. The one person I wanted to bring up, so they lost Rodney Smith, their running back, who was pretty good. They have a running back named Muhammad Ibrahim, who got hurt last year, I believe, early on. But as a true freshman, he stepped in for other injured running backs. So this is his 3rd year, if you're tracking here. And his stats 2 years ago were almost identical to what Rodney Smith did. So I think that to Tanner Morgan and Rashad Bateman's benefit, it's going to be just a plug and play for their offense coming into this year. So Muhammad Ibrahim was the player from Minnesota that I really wanted to point out. I've also got some players here from Michigan State, Illinois. Where do we want to go next, gentlemen?
Just take us everywhere. Go to Illinois.
Ooh, okay. This has the hardest explanation name ever. So their running back, Mike Epstein, he's a player to watch to make sure the offense keeps clicking, because a pivotal part of their offense, especially late in last year in their comeback against Michigan State, for instance. Their quarterback, Brandon Peters, that goes unsaid. Also the receiver, Josh Immature Baby. Did I nail that? I think I
nailed it. Oh my
yes,
God.
Josh Immature Baby. All right, so
Very nice.
he's a receiver that I really want to watch. Epstein is definitely one of the running backs. He's got he's a one-cut and quick burst guy. I started watching some film on him because, listen, I just watched the Epstein doc. So the name
I was going to say, was that the film that you watched?
The name interested me.
It's not the same.
He could be really, really exciting for them. Mark?
The fact that Mike Epstein is still playing college football is shocking to me because it felt like I had covered him out of St. Thomas Aquinas like 9 years ago. So that was a blast from the past there. He's had some injury issues, so that's going to be interesting. He's back now. I guess it'll only be it's only fourth year. So I was like, oh my gosh, you got like a sixth year, but I guess time flies, I guess.
We're just getting old, Mark. That's what it is, man.
Man, every day I'm starting to cover kids of, guys I watched, play, and it just, but I see a lack of, there's just not a lot of wow factor here in the offensive skill for Illinois. I just think that's been a big part of their problem is those splash big plays. Where are they going to come from? It's hard to grind it out on the ground 4.5 yards at a time. And that's, when I look at, kind of what they have coming back, it's just like, where are those splash plays coming from? Because we can look at teams that have similar records. I mean, you look at like Nebraska, who was 5-7 last year, and there's plenty of splash plays to be had with Martinez and Robinson and some of those guys. You don't struggle to see where they could, get those points, and it's looking bleak. They gotta find somebody who can kind of move the needle there a little bit. A lot of vets. Corbin's gone, right? Brown's gone. I mean, yeah, they got to find some guys who can change the scoreboard.
And last year when they upset Wisconsin, I believe it was, their last 3 drives maybe, because Kyle, you were over at my house watching that. I believe it was Illinois and Wisconsin, right? Their offense never looked like it was moving forward. Every time they dropped back to pass, Peters was scrambling or trying to get a quick hit, and it ended up being their defense that got them in that position. Epstein in particular, especially after seeing, because that's what I watched was the Aquinas High School highlights. He could be someone on the edge that actually really gives them a burst that might be needed.
Yeah, and that Wisconsin game that wasn't an Illinois comeback. That was a Wisconsin just
implosion.
Yeah,
that was unbelievable. I couldn't believe what I was watching.
I've never been a bigger fan of Lovie Smith.
Truly.
Man, I'm trying to stay away from the.
No, you know what? Let's
the big boys.
No more limit on the big boys. The embargo is off. Let's rip it.
Well, I do have a question for you guys. So, Wisconsin is finally losing what feels like the 15th guy who's run for over 1,000 yards in the last 5 years. So, who is next? Who is next in the Wisconsin running back pipeline?
It's plug and play, man. Doesn't matter.
I know. I can't wait.
Yeah, I think Kyle could get 900 yards.
I might be able to.
Just falling forward behind that offensive line.
If I fall forward, I'm only getting like 2 yards. I'm not that big.
That's a good point. I actually had Wisconsin's defense as a point of focus for me. Some stats from last year. So they're returning 81% of their production. They ranked first in the nation last year on third down conversion percentage. So they gave up the worst third down conversion percentage against offenses, if that makes sense. And they also placed second in the nation on havoc rate. Their defensive linemen in particular that I wanted to point out, Isaiah Loudermilk, Keanu Benton, Garrett Rand. Those guys are going to continue to keep that Wisconsin defense pushing and let the linebackers just fly around. So I think Wisconsin has probably got a top 10 defense, maybe again. I mean, they've always had a pretty strong defense.
I'd agree with that.
I've got one from Maryland. I can't believe he hasn't been said, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. There was a player, a receiver named Rakeem Jarrett, who was signed to LSU, and he flipped to Maryland. And that is the only person that I really have that much interest in on Maryland, is to see how Raheem Jarrett, and in particular how Maryland uses him, because I'd imagine, A, he's probably going to come in and be one of the most talented offensive players, but also B, a signal to other recruits of, hey, if you're a big-time recruit, why not come here and play immediately? Because if he stays healthy, I'd expect him to be out there for a large percentage of those snaps, even with Josh Jackson fumbling away games.
And he only watched the first 2 games of the season last year, and it was like, this is the greatest offense that's ever been.
Yeah. He saw 70 points in a game, and he goes, yeah, that's easy money. Done.
Yeah, I mean, I think Maryland has assembled talent. Now, can it be coached up? That's kind of been my question. You know, Mike Locksley has never, ever had a problem recruiting. It's acquiring talent's never been a problem there. It's, can he formulate all that into a cohesive unit? And I like some of their young backs, the Jacobs kid, and they've got some guys. I mean, it's just going to be a matter of, okay, we've kind of seen this movie before with them, where they've accumulated individual players, and it for whatever reason, it doesn't look right when Saturday rolls around. So that's my question. I actually do like their talent.
It'll be interesting to see how they do, especially on defense, because I think they gave up like 40-something points per game last year in Big Ten play, and they went the dreaded JUCO route to try to plug some holes. So it'll be, like you said, really interesting to see if they can get some of that talent to play well together, because you can't give up. I mean, that's awful. That's terrible.
Per SP Plus, they had the 3rd worst defense in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And the only people that were worse were Purdue and Rutgers, and that's not hard to believe.
Just love hearing Rutgers.
I mean, it is what it is.
And I'm just not sure how much upward mobility they have this year. I mean, where is that getting better? Because I can argue some of these other teams are going to get better. I mean, you know, Rutgers gets a transfer from Brendan White at Ohio. He's the Rose Bowl MVP 2 years ago. It's going to be a huge upgrade for Rutgers. You know, where is Maryland going to really improve on that side of the ball this year?
You have to think that it's a huge step back from Michigan State, maybe a huge step back from Indiana, and hopefully, depending on how they decide to do this conference-only schedule, that they end up facing like the Northwesterns of the world instead of the Minnesota or Wisconsins. That's the only upward mobility I can think of.
And hoping that Rutgers doesn't make that big of a leap.
Yeah, hoping that Rutgers is just a total mess, that Michigan State, all the turnover, maybe that'll just fall apart, you know, halfway through the year or something. It's really dependent on the other people, on the other teams.
And it's a bad off season to be a first year coach at the school that you're at. I mean, not that Mel Tucker and Greg Schiano are first year coaches, but they lost you're trying to, instill a new culture, a new system. I mean, geez, that's going to be something to watch, I think, too, with those teams.
I was going to touch on Iowa's receiving core, oddly enough. So Nate Stanley's gone, but there are 4 receivers that I'm interested in what they do this year, because I just hate myself and pick hard names to pronounce. They got Nico Reganey, Amir Smith-Marset, Brandon Smith, Tyrone Tracy Jr. I think it probably is the best receiving core that Iowa's had in at least in the recent memory. And they still got their running backs, Tyler Goodson, McKee Sargent. So whoever comes in or ends up being their quarterback is going to have, I think, a pretty loaded offense in terms of playmaking ability. So that's a whole side of the ball, really, that I want to watch, Iowa's offense. And I think that leaves us with Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State is untouched so far. Is that correct? Michigan State, Antoine Simmons, linebacker, he's great.
I had to sneak that in there.
Yeah. I didn't have. Well, you stole my little.
Sneak it in there.
You stole my Harlan Barnett line, because I was going to dive into him just on what he did for Michigan State back in the early teens. But I think that the Michigan State's defense is going to be I don't think there's going to be much of a drop off there with
No, they kept the entire staff, basically.
Yeah, and I wonder if he's going to have every year they rotate to a new position like D'Antonio did, and just instead of actually replacing assistants.
No. Jeez.
Let's start with Penn State, since no one here's a Penn State guy. Oh, no, we did Penn State, didn't we? We did Journey Brown. Journey Brown and Sean Clifford and everybody else.
Well, yeah, we talked about I don't know how we got through Penn State without talking Micah Parsons and Pat
that's who I was looking for.
I think, I'm going to get some blowback for this too, but here we go. When you look at the Big Ten, and specifically the East and the kind of the gauntlet that is, there's no question in my mind that Penn State has the second most individual talent. Like, everyone's going to talk about that Ohio State-Michigan game. Now, can James Franklin coach it all up and put it all together in the big games? I mean, I think that's kind of yet to be determined. But if I'm looking at, player for player, I think Penn State's talent is the biggest threat to Ohio State this year. And I think he's got a really well-balanced team this year. And I think he'd really have to screw it up to not have a great season.
And that's James Franklin for you.
Do you think the biggest difference is at quarterback, having Justin Fields instead of Sean Clifford? That feels like the biggest.
That's a massive
gap.
That's a big difference. I think that's a big difference. I think you look around the Big Ten, and I think that's kind of a big reason why it has been tough, is if you look at the quarterback play. But the offensive line at Ohio State, this is probably the best offensive line Ohio State's had in maybe 25 years. 25 years. I think we're going back to Orlando Case, Corey Stringer days to get a better offensive line at Ohio State. So that's going to be the thing as well. But I think ultimately quarterback play is a big separator there between those two teams.
So we can actually kind of we can use this as a perfect segue into Ohio State players, because I wanted to ask you who you thought is going to ultimately be the lead back with J.K. Dobbins gone. And now that you mentioned the offensive line, it might not matter, but who do you think has the inside track to be the starting running back and to help Fields out specifically? And if you want to dive into the receivers and stuff too.
So it's interesting. I do kind of joke that it doesn't really matter. I mean, like, you and I should be able to get 4 or 5 yards a pop behind that offensive line. I mean, it's the best one they've had in so long, and it was a great one last year. It was one of those, J.K. Dobbins would come out and Master Teague would come in and get 7 yards a carry, and then they'd bring in Marcus Crowley or Steele Chambers and they would get 7 yards a carry. It was never ending, and I don't think it's gonna be quite that. I don't think they've got a J.K. this year. I think it's going to be Trey Sermon, but this is wild. All three, their top 3 running backs are coming off serious injury. Master Teague had an Achilles thing. I think he's going to be ready to go. Trey Sermon's coming off an ACL, and Marcus Crowley's coming off a knee injury, which I believe is an ACL. He's coming off a serious knee injury. So who's going to be the healthiest when this gets together? But I think it's going to be Trey Sermon. But unlike last year, where they kind of just rode JK the second half of the season, I think part of that may have been a Heisman thing. But this year, it will be more committee. I expect Sermon and Teague to get the lion's share of the carries, though. I think probably Sermon gives you a little more in the passing game, so I think he has the inside track, probably a little healthier. But it should be kind of a two-headed system.
Maybe the shortened season helps them in that regard, because it's easier to keep when you have 8, 9, or 10 games and you have 3 backs that might get dinged up, being able to rotate them enough, or by outclassing depending on your schedule. If you're up on somebody, it's easy to put in your freshman running back too and just let him just carry it and waste time.
Yeah, they've got some depth there if those guys are healthy. And it's just, again, it's a matter of, okay, how do things actually look for them? Again, assuming we're on schedule with everything, how do things actually look for them on September 5th, health-wise? Are the knees good? Is the Achilles good? I mean, there's a lot of, I would say, finger crossing going on right now there, just to make sure everyone's going to be ready to go and be in good shape. But it's gonna be more by committee this year for sure.
Okay, and before we jump to Michigan, I want to put you on the spot a little bit. Hearing how good of a recruiter Brian Hartline is for Ohio State, in your coverage, what is it that he's doing differently, or that he's doing so well to be such an ace recruiter for Ohio State?
Well, first of all, he likes it, and that's important. Some guys are just not built to be recruiters, and so he enjoys it. He's young. He's played in the NFL, so he knows how to relate to the kids. He was where they want to be. He can give them, he can share a cool story about the NFL, and just, he works hard at it. I mean, I don't think there's this like secret sauce or whatever to recruiting. You have to like it. You have to work hard at it. And that's really, 90% of it. And if you can throw in that he's a young guy who's been in NFL locker rooms and can kind of share some experiences from that, that's all the better. But I mean, he really just, he works it. He zeroes in on about maybe 6 or 7 guys to get his 3 receivers, and that's who he recruits, and he goes after them, like crazy.
Yeah, it was shocking the first time I saw him at the top of, I think it was Rivals, like recruiter rankings, and I was just like, man, I hadn't even thought the name in a few years, because the last time I saw him was when he went to the NFL.
And you could start to see it coming, because he was like a quality control coach on the staff for maybe a year or two, and I'd talk to recruits, and they would mention him, and it's like, okay, that's interesting, because normally you're only mentioning the position coach, maybe the coordinator, and the head coach. You're not generally mentioning a recruit in an interview setting, or just talking to him is generally not going to mention to me a quality control guy. And he would come up when I was talking to other receivers, and that was interesting to me. So I kind of knew, I'm like, okay, this guy is like into this thing. He's into this recruiting thing. So I thought he'd do well. Did I think he would sign one of the best receiver classes we've seen the last maybe 5 or 10 years? That I guess was, and getting Julian Fleming out of Pennsylvania, where every kid from that area of the state of Pennsylvania goes to Penn State, was pretty amazing. So yeah, he's I thought he'd do well, but he has certainly even beat my expectations.
On to Michigan. Jeff, they lost a lot. They're 119th in returning offense, 110th in returning defense. Oh boy, that is, I didn't even think it was that bad until I just hadn't looked at it. So if you want to name some players in particular, and if you want to even talk about maybe what you need to see in terms of progress, maybe from Gaddis or Harbaugh or Brown, go ahead, dive in. This is your time.
Yeah, that was quite a few different topics. I think just to start on offense, you always want to see a progression in year 2, and I think towards the end of last year, things really started to click with Gaddis' offense. They really didn't run the ball that well. I think they finished under 4 yards per carry, which was surprising, but Patterson finished with over 3,000 yards with his limitations. Now that's going to be, I think that's the biggest question, is you lose 4 starters on the offensive line to the draft, and you replace your quarterback with no spring and now no non-conference. So Michigan might end up being better on offense, but it might not look that good, if that makes sense. So that's going to be interesting. They have plenty of production coming back, running back the 2 starters from last year back. They get Chris Evans back, who was suspended last year, more of a speed and space guy. I am glad Gaddis has been there, because he's finally adopting the right approach in recruiting receivers. They've stopped going for guys that are 6'3", 220, and they're going more for guys that are, 5'10", 5'11", 6 foot, but can run 4.4s. It's kind of the approach I think Ohio State has really succeeded with. So yeah, I mean, the offense is going to be fun. The defense is going to be really good under Don Brown, but fans are kind of at a point where it's like, okay, great, you're elite against 10 teams on your schedule. It's time to, finish the big one, and that hasn't happened. And I think some of it is the players, some of it's the coaches, but that's kind of where the fans are at. It's like put up or shut up time for him.
Is there anyone in particular on defense you're looking forward to seeing?
There's 2 guys. Cam McGrone, he's a linebacker, kind of came on towards the middle of last year. Just a very much like Devin Bush. He's a speedster, super athletic. Really needs to continue to refine his game. Love to watch him. And then the other, 5-star on their defense is Dax Hill. He's a safety that started towards the end of the year and really, really performed well. So, just seeing him back playing center field, I'm, excited to see.
Awesome. And are there any other players that anyone wants to bring up before we knock out these schedules? This will be a shorter version for schedules because there's going to be less games. And then we get on to our predictions.
Well, I really like Nico Collins as a future NFL guy. It's interesting. I look at what they've got, and the glass half full would be, Ronnie Bell, Nico Collins returning. They got backs returning. If it's McCaffrey, I don't know. Gosh, they just got to figure out that quarterback situation, because I think they have some pretty good weapons here. And I've seen Ed Warner. He's not the greatest recruiter, but I've seen him build offensive lines from scratch. From nothing. When he was at Ohio State, they had years where they lost 4 guys, and you're like, well, how are they ever going to build a good offensive line the next year? And he did it, and they always got better as the year went on. And I thought last year the offensive line got better as the year went on as well. I think so. It just, to me, it comes down to, what are they doing at quarterback, and why is this taking so long for them to get a quarterback? I just, it feels like, Harbaugh got this reputation as kind of being a quarterback whisperer. I'm like, okay, what quarterback are we on now? 5, 6, 7? They've got to get better than average play at quarterback if they want to get over the hump. That's really, for me, their thing. I think we can go round and round about the skill guys that they've lost in the offensive line, but I think there's some optimism there. To me, it's, can you develop a quarterback?
So let's get into our key games. We're going to, again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, presume that they're going to play out only the conference games as they are on their schedule. They just cut off the ends or cut off the out of conference. So subject to change. I'll lead off. Nebraska at Iowa. 2 years in a row, Iowa's won this on a game-ending field goal. You may remember last year where the Iowa kicker kicked a 48-yard field goal and then did the Dikembe no finger and then blew a kiss to the Huskers sideline.
What a wonderful thing.
It's such a... I was looking up something about Scott Frost unrelated to this show, and I ended up, not unbeknownst to me, because I'm not familiar with the message board scene, click on an Iowa message board that was speaking about Scott Frost. I did not, and maybe it's just me being ignorant here, I did not realize how much these guys hate each other, man. Iowa and Nebraska hate each other so much. It was disgusting, the things that were being said in that message board.
You've got two programs that recruit a territory of like 1 billion square miles to find like 5 kids that they can actually recruit out there. So it's competitive out there. They're fighting for the 3 kids to come out of their respective states each year that are, scholarship kids. So there's not a lot of, when there's not a lot of deer to hunt. Yeah, the hunters are going to be a little more competitive.
They're all inevitably interior linemen, too.
Yeah, but they each got an arm on the kid that's on his daddy's tractor trying to pull him out of the damn thing to get him to come play football for him.
Really intrigued by... I was looking over Wisconsin's schedule. Again, it has changed a lot because they lost their 2 awesome non-conference games against App and Notre Dame, but their first 2 games are Michigan and Minnesota, so they're starting right off. We talked about losing Taylor. They have a lot of production coming back, but just that's a real tough way to start the season. And then they have a couple games, Purdue, Nebraska, and Iowa to finish. So it's going to be really, I'm just intrigued to see how they are this year.
Yeah, because you're getting thrown right into the fire.
Yeah. At Michigan, first week, yeah.
That's what's been lost on me as we were preparing for the show and hearing that the out-of-conference is gone, is that you're just going to go right into it. Like, some team is going to have to start their year against Northwestern's going to have to play Penn State the first week, if it stands as it is now. And that is a tough way to break in a new offensive coordinator.
I think I've got another game that's kind of morbid. I've got morbid interest in. And it'd be the first game of the season for Rutgers, and that's Ohio State.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh.
I mean, that's not the way you want to come in if you're Greg Schiano.
Mark, will they call off the dogs on Schiano?
Yeah, I don't think there's bad blood there. I could see them going easy there, especially since, not to derail us so far, but they've got their backup quarterbacks are basically true freshmen, and at some point they're going to have to get a look at those guys, especially with Justin Fields being a running threat and what that means and the physical toll he takes. So yeah, I don't think in this new landscape, I think it's going to be about just getting W's and getting guys out of games.
Yeah, maybe they'll institute like a
mercy rule.
Mercy rule, a white towel they can throw in, and if you're up by 50, they just end the game to save everybody the time. Penn State at Michigan. Home team has won the last 4. And it's going to be at Michigan, assuming here. I think Penn State probably wins it this year, and that's going to be interesting just for that rivalry in general, but also how the East unfolds.
Yeah, and just one note on that. There's kind of a quiet, I don't know if Mark has heard this much, there's kind of a quiet rivalry brewing between the coaching staffs because James Franklin really hits Michigan hard with a negative recruiting, and Penn State actually has, I think, 3 4-star kids from the Detroit area committed in this class. There's 2 or another one coming, but they've really gone at Michigan, both, recruiting and in talking to recruits. So I hope Harbaugh is extra fired up for that one.
I don't think you could find 2 more different personalities than James Franklin and Jim Harbaugh. Like I could know nothing about like the 2 programs or anything like that. But if I spent 5 minutes with James Franklin and then spent 5 minutes with Jim Harbaugh, I'd say, I bet those 2 wouldn't get along. It's just like, it just doesn't. I don't know. They're very different guys. Well, I'm gonna throw out a game. I'm gonna go from one of the best games of the 2 prominent programs. I'm gonna throw out a really interesting game to me, and probably nobody else. How about Purdue at Nebraska to kick things off? 2 coaches who got off to like these great hype starts, kind of struggled big time last year. Fans are kind of ready to kill them, and now they've got to kick off with each other. And the team that loses, if you want some entertainment on September 5th, Purdue or Nebraska, whichever team loses that game, that fan base is going to lose its mind. And it is going to be questioning its future in a way that most programs will not be after week 1. It's going to be.
I hope it's Nebraska.
I hope they tie.
That would be an extreme. And to be two coaches that need to prove something, for them to both have such an explosive offense reputation, that game's going to be exciting as hell. It's probably going to be like car crash exciting, but still extremely exciting.
It's going to be like 73-65 or something, probably.
Yeah. It's not going to be like a demolition derby. It's going to be like bumper cars where they just keep bouncing off each other and just going onto the end zone.
You're saying this, and it's going to be Cheez-It Bowl exciting.
9 interceptions. Aiden Martinez fumbles it 5 times. It becomes a complete disaster. That's all the games I kind of had pointed out. I had Iowa, Wisconsin, but we kind of hit on Wisconsin's early schedule, and I thought Jeff made a better point out of it.
Well, and I think Minnesota's season is determined by that 2-game stretch of them playing Wisconsin on the road, then Michigan at home.
Yeah. They really don't have a bad schedule.
No, their schedule isn't that hard to manage, I don't think, if they can get through that.
Yeah, that really, they avoid Ohio State.
And Penn State.
For now. See if you add that 10th game, what happens there. But yeah,
you're right.
For now, the road games aren't brutal. Maryland, Illinois, not that, road environments are going to be a totally different thing this year, but you're not, Yeah, Wisconsin's all, and even with no fans, at Wisconsin's going to be a tough one. But Maryland, Illinois, and then you get Purdue and Northwestern at home. Man,
and finish at Nebraska, and they may be just totally defeated by them.
Because the Michigan game's not going to impact as much. I mean, if they just beat Wisconsin, that's going to be very difficult for them to not win that division, I think.
Yep.
If they stay healthy.
Yeah, because I think they beat Iowa to start the year. Especially
with all the stuff going on there, that being the first game.
Puts them behind the 8 ball, Iowa that is, and then Wisconsin, and it's a catch-up game for both of them, for Iowa and Wisconsin, to try to get back into it.
PJ's good, man. He's definitely not everyone's cup of tea. I mean, he's a intense guy. He's, a lot of people think some of the stuff's gimmicky, but like, man, I got asked on our site a few weeks ago, like, if Ryan Day stepped down at Ohio State, like tomorrow, who would you hire in the Big Ten if you were Ohio State? I'd hire PJ Fleck. I think I don't think he's getting quite enough respect for what he's doing there. That is not an easy job.
No, he is eccentric, it feels like. But he's
kind of a young Urban Meyer, where he rubbed people the wrong way, but you look at the results and the way he motivates his guys, and it's like, okay, how do I argue against this?
Well, and not only his players, but he also seems to have he puts all of his faith into his coordinators and position coaches too. And I think that those coaches feel that. Like, it's only going to empower a coach. And if he's making the right coaching hires, it's just a win-win.
I know a couple guys on that staff, and PJ works them like dogs. But they love him. I don't hear stories about guys not liking to work for him, and he works them hard, but they still, I mean, that there's something to be said for that.
In another world, PJ Fleck is a millionaire off multi-level marketing. That's what I'm hearing. All right, let's make our conference predictions. So again, just a small reset. We're assuming the schedule's going to go as planned. So we're going to pick an East, a West, and then who we think is going to win the championship. So let's start in the East. Mark, we're going to have you go last because you're the guest. Jeff?
I think this is finally the year Michigan State takes it. No, just kidding. It's going to be Ohio State.
Okay, Ohio State from you, question. Kyle?
Until Ohio State gets dethroned, it's Ohio State.
I wanted to be slick and pick Penn State, but I also picked Ohio State because Fields over Clifford. It's just too big of a gap. Mark?
I mean, I have to go Ohio State, and my reasoning is that if you look at what they're returning at quarterback, at receiver, at offensive line, that's going to be in a landscape where everyone's losing so much practice time. Shouldn't the team that returns the chemistry of the quarterback and the receivers and the chemistry of an experienced offensive line, shouldn't that team be able to get out of the gates faster than teams that are replacing quarterbacks, replacing offensive linemen, not sure who their weapons are going to be? I just think that if you have an experienced offense, after all this practice time, all these teams have missed, that it's going to be a lot easier chemistry-wise earlier to get rolling. And that's really the big thing to me. I love Penn State's talent, but I just – and now, that if that at Penn State game, I mean, that it's not going to be a 110,000 person whiteout in primetime. So that game – their roadblock, I think, becomes a little easier. So, I don't know. It's hard for me to go against Fields, those two receivers with Olave and Wilson, and that offensive line. It's really hard for me to go against that.
All right, so we're all on Ohio State. In the West, Kyle.
So it's real hard for me to pick against Wisconsin because they're always fucking there. They're always there. It's the same thing that they do in basketball. They're always there. But the MLM machine at Minnesota has got me sold. Give me Minnesota to win.
The Herbalife head coach himself. I've also got Minnesota to win the West. Jeff?
I'm going to be the contrarian here. Wisconsin's next 2,000-yard rusher Nikia. Since Minnesota beat Wisconsin last year, I think it's going to flip, and their schedules are pretty comparable, depending on what happens. So I'm actually going to take Wisconsin this year.
All right, and finally, Mark, who do you have winning the West?
I'm not going to totally cop out here. What I will say is, if they go to a 10-gamer, I think that whoever Wisconsin and Minnesota draw in that 10th game could ultimately maybe decide. I mean, what if one of them draws Ohio State or Penn State? I mean, that could decide the division. So I'm going to just throw that out there as food for thought. But I'm going to go Wisconsin. And again, this is going to blow up in my face probably immediately, because I don't think the schedule is actually going to hold up the way it is right now. But if you look at their schedule, they would, in theory, have a bye week between Michigan and Minnesota. And they get Minnesota at home, which won't be as important as usual, but I just, experience at quarterback. Even if, they lost, they got a good backup in Graham Mertz, a guy I'm really high on. They've got some receivers. Their defense is going to be nasty. I know I just talked up PJ Fleck, but I think I'm going to give it to Wisconsin.
And finally, the conference champion. Kyle, you and I go first here. I'm picking Ohio State. I imagine you might be the same.
Yeah, I'm going to. Once again, as long as they're not dethroned, they are the champions.
Okay, and then Jeff, I want you to make your choice and just say it as slow as possible.
The flood that's going to overtake Lucas Oil Stadium, cancel the game. I was going to say a meteor, but I can't do that with Mark here, so it's going to be Ohio State.
And Mark.
I mean, they've just dominated this conference for so long at this point, and they have so many things looking good for them this year, if there's a season, that I just can't go. I can't go against Justin Fields. I can't go against Fields and that offense. I think they'll regroup enough on defense. But I mean, who in this league is gonna keep them under 30, 35 points? I mean, and
yeah.
I don't see where the weakness is on offense and then if they just get decent defense, they're gonna be fine.
And those conference championship picks are brought to you by BuckeyeScoop.com. We're all on Ohio State. I think even if it was a normal season with the out of conference schedule, I think all of us probably would have leaned the same way for the most part.
Definitely.
Such a boring pick, but it's I mean,
it is what it is, man. Wait till we get to the ACC preview.
Yeah. Exactly. That's an even more obvious, but yeah.
So
Syracuse might have something for you, brother.
Yeah. No one comes to the dome when it's empty and walks out with a win.
The newly revamped dome.
Just still doing construction in the stands when the game playing. So before we get out of here, Mark, I had one very small on the spot question, and I hope you can do this on your feet. In all your time covering and interviewing and dealing with recruits, this might be however you want to interpret this question. Either who were you the most wrong about, or who overperformed versus how you would have graded them or thought they were going to perform on the national stage?
Two guys immediately jump to mind. Even though he was a prolific high school quarterback, I never in a million years would have thought Mitch Trubisky would go number 2 overall in the NFL draft. Was I wrong or was I right?
You're right.
Was I weirdly right about that? I looked bad for a minute and then I was actually right. I don't know. The one I'm definitely was wrong about was Denzel Ward, the cornerback out from Ohio State, went number 4 to the Browns a couple years ago. Never in a million years thought he was a top 5 pick. I mean, he was a good track guy, but he was small, skinny. Ohio State gave him about 5 minutes to contemplate the offer, and then he wasn't going to have the offer anymore. He basically had 5 minutes to commit to the offer or go to Illinois or something. So I don't even think Ohio State thought he was a future top 5 pick. And he was just an animal. So that would probably be the biggest one.
That's awesome. And if you want to go ahead, Mark, plug Buckeye Scoop again, if you want to, your Twitter, and then we can get out of here.
Yep. BuckeyeScoop.com. Daily coverage of Ohio State, where we do podcasts, we do analysis, we kind of cover the whole. We have something for everybody if you're an Ohio State fan. So we've got a great staff. We're working hard over there and trying to bring the best Ohio State content. And you can follow us at Buckeye Scoop.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And if you've made it this far, guys, thank y'all for listening. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop us a 5-star review if you haven't already. It helps us with the numbers. And Kyle and Jeff, any parting words?
I just think that Buckeye Scoop needs to be sponsored by Jeff's Tears now, too.
The Contesano Tier Trail.
No comment.
Okay, well, now we've upset Jeff. Guys, thanks again for listening, and we will be back next week.
Hi, my name is Joshua Tracy.
And I am Corwin Heller.
And we are the hosts of a statistics and sports podcast called Juicing the Numbers.
We cover the NFL, college football, MLB, and the NHL with anything that we like to talk about in between.
If you like sports and the numbers behind it, come check out our show, Juicing the Numbers, on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you find podcasts. Hit us up on Twitter at JuicingPod.